This is the School Leadership Show, the only podcast dedicated to helping practicing and aspiring school leaders improve their craft. The School Leadership Show brings together thought leaders from inside and outside of education to deliver you the insights and tools you need to succeed in school leadership. And by the way, we're looking for sponsors for the show. If you or someone you know might be interested in reaching over 50,000 listeners, email me at mike@schoolleadershipshow.com. In this episode, veteran Superintendent Dan White and I have a wide-ranging conversation about context-based leadership. Much of what we talk about is drawn from many years of working with school leaders on the state, regional, and national levels. This is the first in a series of episodes with Dan related to the nuts and bolts of leadership in general and school leadership specifically, based primarily on our popular workshop, Liquid Gold for Leaders, 30 Rules No One Has the Guts to Tell You. Enjoy this conversation with Dan White. I'm here with my colleague, Dan White, and we're going to talk a little bit about some of the things we've learned over the course of our presentations that we've given around the country over the last couple of years. So hi, Dan.
Hi, Mike.
So when did we start giving the 30 rules for school leaders presentation? 30 rules no one has the guts to tell you.
I think it was almost exactly 2 years ago because we are headed to AESA. That's a plug for AESA in San Antonio this week. So exactly 2 years ago this week we started that presentation, I believe in New Orleans.
So hopefully some of the folks who were at that presentation in San Antonio are listening to this. So a big shout out. I'm sure it was fantastic and you all had a great time.
Well, indubitably.
So one of the things that we thought we'd talk about today, again, some of the things that we've learned over time, but this idea that we've been kicking around about context-based leadership. So what do we mean by that?
I think it's, Mike, it's a little esoteric, but that's kind of the point. It's the ability for a leader to understand and evaluate the context in which they're doing business, their community, the context that their organization functions in when they're trying to make important decisions on behalf of their organization, on behalf of their staff, and so forth.
Well, and I think what we've noticed over time, in our work, particularly in superintendent searches and even watching colleagues around the state of New York and even outside of New York, that the reason why people end up failing in leadership positions has virtually nothing to do with their knowledge or their skills, right?
It generally isn't how much they know about curriculum and instruction. It's the soft skills. It's the ability to manage the environment that they're doing business in. Mike, one of the things I'm struck about after, I think, dozens of times of doing this presentation and some PD around aspects of the presentation for, let me see, what have we done? We've done national conferences. We've done it for individual organizations, trade organizations, you name it. People actually look at us a little funny when we start it because they're like, are you really going to talk about that stuff? And we're like, yeah, we are. That tells me they're not talking about any of these things.
Well, we talked about that a bunch of times where we tend to look at things almost from a skill-based perspective in terms of skills that we frame them as rules, but skills that we tend to ignore, just think that people know and without having been taught them.
And I think we tend to in education when people complete their certifications, they come from administrator school, they complete their certifications, we kind of hand them the keys and say, go forth. And you're right, it's not their inherent knowledge of education that leads to failure or leads to problems, either for them or the organizations. It's their ability to manage really an ever-changing environment in which they're doing business. And Mike, I'll tell you, another thing that has struck me as we've been doing this presentation, we talk about this stuff all the time, and you and I still make some of these mistakes on a daily basis. The amount of information and the things coming at school administrators these days is significant. It is very easy to slip into, I'm going to go from brush fire to brush fire to address these things and not take a step back and look at the context and the long-term aspects of decisions that are being made. These people are under pressure. That's one thing for certain, that no matter what state we're in or what organization we're presenting to, they are really under pressure on a daily basis.
So if we were going to talk about context-based leadership from a perspective of trying to be helpful to folks. So what can we offer people as maybe they're new to school leadership, maybe they've been in it for a while and they're looking to change jobs or move up? I mean, what advice should we give them?
I think maybe we need to take a look at what school leaders, first of all, have in common that they're dealing with every single day. And we know some of them, and people listening to this podcast certainly could recite them. It is there's always something. There's always something extra they have to do. There's always something going on. There's always a mini crisis they have to manage. There's pressures coming externally and internally. There's people that expect them to be all things to all people. That's really, I think, a very common thread that we're seeing from all school leaders, is that they feel like, one, they don't have the time to take a step back and evaluate context, evaluate where they're going. One thing I think that we have tried to communicate to people, and we can take this account into our own professional lives, is regardless of those things, we need to find time to take a step back and evaluate where we are as leaders, the decisions we're making, and how that's playing out in the environment in which we're doing our business.
Well, and I think also to have a group of critical friends, I hate that term, but folks who are your friends, but also your colleagues who can help you think through this stuff. Because a lot of times we start to believe our own PR and forget that we might not have the most accurate perception of our own work.
Mike, I think that's right. It's interesting that when we do this presentation, we do some of the work around it, and we engage in the kind of banter and conversations that occur when we do it. People feel still that they have to have all the answers. Because I think of the pace of the day that we all exist in, they're not reaching out and using their colleagues and using the information that's available to them. I think one of the things we can do for people like you and I who are in higher level positions is to give license for our administrators, our leaders, to be able to take a step back, to be able to self-evaluate and ask questions, to be able to be a little bit vulnerable and say, that didn't go so well. What can we do differently the next time so that it goes a little bit better? We're expected to really function in a world now, and I think this is not just educational leadership, but I would say it's how organizations are functioning now, where people want instant gratitude, they want instant answers, they want instant feedback. That doesn't always lead to leaders making the best decisions and being successful.
Well, and we talked about that in one of our earlier podcasts on decision making in particular, that idea of taking time to make decisions. So giving yourself permission and then having the self-awareness to step back and realize that somebody else's crisis is not your emergency.
It's not. I'll give you a really good example, something that any school leader has dealt with, and that is some very bad behavior for an employee that could potentially get into the media. While you may have dealt with that, and while I may have dealt with that numerous times over our career, it's stressful, it's anxiety producing, and when people get in those types of situations, you tend to lose sight of the things you do normally on a day-to-day basis. You gave a very good example of when you came upon a traffic accident scene, you forgot to put your car in park.
Yeah.
So under stressful situations, people don't always do the things that they would normally do.
You get tunnel vision, and that happens anytime the adrenaline kicks in. You get tunnel vision, and you lose sight of what's around you. I think that's a good point.
So I think that the ability for ourselves as school leaders to give each other the support that's necessary. It really is a small community when you think about it. We know people all over the country now in this business, and I can't remember anyone who was unwilling to pick up the phone when we called for an answer, or vice versa. Anyone who doesn't want school leaders to be successful. And we've also met some outstanding people who have a wealth of knowledge and do some really cool things. And if there's one piece of advice we could give any potential school leader or those in the business, is there's a wealth of knowledge out there. There's great people in this business, and if we can, and what you and I are doing, help to create a little bit of community around that, so we can all be self-supporting, I think it can go a long way to helping school leaders be successful.
Well, and I think sometimes too it helps. It's great when people know and understand your context, but at the same time, sometimes they're too close. Sometimes your neighbors are too close to it. Sometimes you need to, get a real outside perspective of somebody who's completely disinterested in what you have going on and can look at your situation objectively.
We do a scenario question in our presentation that asks people to put themselves as the administrator in the situation dealing with maybe a special education issue that can arise in a district. So you see people immediately get into that role of, okay, what do I need to do if this is happening in my district and in my building? What are the factors that I need to consider? You and I have the ability to take a step back and understand in that scenario what actually happened in that situation. It's very easy for people to get themselves back into their silos when they're engaging in situations, and I think a little bit of we all give better advice when we don't have a vested interest in a situation because we can see it objectively. It's good to have those critical friends that are outside of kind of the vested interest in a situation.
Yeah, just having that perspective, because there will be things. The situations are complex. There will be things that when you get in the middle of it, that might be obvious to somebody else that you completely miss. Like I said, it's that whole tunnel vision thing. When you are in the middle of it and you're the one getting beat on by parents and staff and everybody, you tend to lose sight of the bigger picture.
I think the best executive teams in any industry are those that have dissenting opinions or those that have varying ideas of how you approach a topic. I worry about those organizations that have to have a singular thought around a topic. It often says to me that they're off. There is some governments function from a perspective of if everybody's in agreement on an issue, somebody has to take the opposite side to make people see what the potential pitfalls are.
That goes back to, there's a long and storied history of that perspective. That goes back to the devil's advocate in the Vatican, right?
It does.
Is that where that started?
It does.
Lincoln's team of rivals. He assembled a cabinet with very diverse perspectives. But here's the problem, though, with something like that. Let's say you're in a position to assemble the leadership team of the folks that report to you. And how do you, because I think it's a natural human tendency and a trap, if you will, of to hire people who are like ourselves. People who look like us, people who think like us. I mean, it's tough to find bald little people who wear bow ties, but I think you know what I mean.
It certainly is comfortable for folks, but comfortability often doesn't lead to success. And I think it goes back to the ability for ourselves in this business to say, I don't have to have all the answers, but I can surround myself with a multitude of people who together we might have the answers. I also think it's a very healthy thing when you're sitting in your team meetings, whether you're a building principal and you're sitting in faculty meetings or you have a faculty advisory council or you're a superintendent or whatever it is, if everybody's in concert on a way to go, ask the question, why shouldn't we do this? What are the pitfalls? What would the adversary say, and what do we need to consider about that? And even sometimes go to somebody who might say, listen, I don't agree with this. Okay, tell me about that. What do we need to know? I think it's a very healthy perspective. And it doesn't mean you would proceed any differently, but it might mean you would proceed differently.
And I heard an interview a while ago, I think it was with General Stanley McChrystal. I think it was him. And he was talking about that concept in the military that they have called red teaming. So the red team, they're the bad guys when they do military exercises and things like that. And they put some of their best and most talented people on the red team to try to thwart the plans of the good guys, I guess, for lack of a better term. And I think by building that, and I think what I hear you suggesting is that you kind of build that into your culture of decision making and debate. Like we have somebody whose job it is, if nobody does it, to tell us why we shouldn't do something or what could go wrong. We need the person with the doomsday perspective or the I can't even come up with the word right now, but that worst case scenario perspective.
Or it's simply like one of the rules that we have, which is listen more, talk less.
Right.
Which is, don't, if you're the ranking officer in the room, don't talk first. Ask for other people's opinions. Give them the freedom and the space to say something that might be dissenting. That's a trust exercise. It's also an exercise in leaders knowing it's okay to be vulnerable and saying they don't have all the answers. Let the people that are closest to the situation talk first. You might agree with them, you might not.
Well, and I think it's a good point, because as soon as the person in charge in the room opens his or her mouth, then everybody else is going to fall in line. Even though you might have set up a culture that welcomes debate and dissent, the bottom line is there is still that element of positional authority where people feel like they need to defer to the boss.
And that's built into our society a bit. That's built into our organizations. And it is, I think, Mike, it's one of the reasons why one of the biggest nods we get and maybe the laughter we get in this presentation is when we talk about phrases you must avoid at all costs. Because those phrases, while seemingly innocent on the forefront, when you bring in the power and authority question, if your boss says this to you, how would you feel? We have to put people back in that context. So there is power and authority that evolves when you have the boss talking, and the boss always has to be aware of that.
And that's an easy rule. That's something that if you are the boss, whether you're the principal or the assistant superintendent or the superintendent, and you're the what we call the deck officer or whatever, you're the highest ranking person in the room, force yourself to not talk first. Let the other people talk first. We've talked about this before. We often share this story in the presentations about a principal that we know who, with his assistant principals, it's a center-based special education program, decided that they were going to, when they had meetings about kids, when they had staffing meetings or meetings with parents, whatever, they would always start with the person who was closest to the student. So maybe it was that student's one-to-one aide, then maybe the classroom teacher, then the speech pathologist, and kind of work their way away from the student, and the administrator would talk last. And what they found over time was that they were getting more and better information out of the staff members because the administrator didn't talk first and then sort of set the level for everybody else.
Yeah, I don't think you can ask somebody not to think of you as their boss. Mm-hmm. That's just not realistic. What you can do is give them license to be candid and to speak and to give opinion and to help solve a problem. These are adults. We hire adults with master's degrees. They manage households and families. They don't lose their decision-making skill when they walk into our buildings. And they have while they may not have a global perspective always, they have a perspective. And I think it's interesting.
Well, and one strategy I've seen people use when you have a group of folks who might be less than forthcoming with their opinions for whatever reason is, but as the meeting starts, force people to commit something to writing first. So, if you're having a meeting to, I don't know, talk about, whatever it is, a new reading program, or what are we going to do about a particular issue, give people 2 minutes at the beginning to write down what they think should happen, or questions that they have, or some sort of prompt that then, once you get into the discussion, if you find you have people who haven't spoken or who are lagging and who maybe even just process differently, you can go back and say, all right, hey, Mark, what did you have written on your paper? Because then it isn't Mark's got to come up with something on the spot. He can just read what he wrote off the paper, and that can keep the discussion going.
I think there's a multitude of opportunities to do that. I am struck, Mike, as we continue to progress and have these conversations with organizations around the country. My perception of how refreshing it is for people to have some talks on these topics, to talk about things that they don't talk about in an organization. We talk about things like dress for success, right? Or look the part. That is not about someone's personal beauty. That is not about someone's financial ability to dress wonderfully in a very expensive clothes. That's about a professional appearance. That's a skill that not everybody has. That's a skill that people can learn.
Well,
Right?
I think about it. So, so my mother was a home ec teacher, right? So she understood sewing and cooking and things like that, and she was the first one to tell me, believe it or not, before you, Dan, no short sleeves dress shirts with ties.
Now, that's a contextual and regional thing. And so this is a great example to bring back in context. In the Northeast, that would not be acceptable. In plenty of places in the country, it might be, and that's okay. I think we understand that there are contextual differences for that. We use that as kind of a metaphor for think about the environment that you're going into. You know, if you're going to meet with the Chamber of Commerce, how are they going to dress? Can you
Right.
look professionally? And I think it's also about there's wonderful people in this business. If there's one thing that going all over the place and doing this presentation, Mike has reinforced with me, is there's great people in this business, and they're well-meaning, they're intelligent, they do a good job, and we can have as high of expectations for our profession as any executive profession can. So yes, we can expect our people to dress professionally. We can expect them to be able to present well, like any company's executives would be, and that is, if there's been probably a topic that people have been writing fastidiously down when you've been presenting, it's been on presentational skills.
Well, and that's something too. I think there's a common misconception out there that it's okay if you're not a really good presenter. Like on some level that, well, it's sort of charming, like he knows what he's talking about, but he's just not good in front of a group. But that's okay. And I think the point we're making is it's not okay.
It's not okay.
If you're a leader, part of your job, a big part of your job is communication. I think most of your job is communicating things to other people, whether it's parents, teachers, students, you name it. And if you can't communicate effectively in front of a group, you will struggle as a school leader. End of story.
You will struggle, and I think it goes back to uplifting our profession, having the same expectations of leaders and administrators and executives in our profession as other professions do. Can you imagine a law firm saying to an attorney who has to present in court, it's okay that nobody understands what you're saying? It's not okay. We are learned people, and I think these are skills that, while they don't get taught in graduate school, they are skills that can be developed with leaders, and there are opportunities to do that.
Right, and I think, and we try to get into some of that during our presentations, but we typically only have an hour and a half, and it's hard to do a deep dive on some of those very specific niche skills, like presenting, like dressing or looking the part. Things
Like
Networking,
networking. For instance.
absolutely. Well, and I hope we have folks here from our AESA presentation who are listening, because we did talk in that presentation. It'll be past tense at this point, about networking and how to network, and the opportunity you have at a national conference with people from all over the country and the world. A lot of these conferences are international. So here's an opportunity to meet people and to get contact information and to connect so that you can build your network and have help later. But what do we walk into these, happy hours and stuff, and what do we see?
We see people talking with people they already know, which is not the point of your organization sending you to a conference. It's, listen, you can engage with people, it's fine, but a couple of tips that we give people are, see who's going to this conference, who do you want to talk to and meet. There are tremendous people in this business who have great ideas and who have solutions to issues you're probably working on right now.
Well, and I think that's a good point. If you think about it, just think about New York State for a second. We have over 700 school districts. I guarantee whatever issue you have going on in your New York State high school, somebody else in New York State has dealt with it or something very similar to it.
There's no question. Actually, in the presentation we just did in Michigan, where we spent 3 hours, and so we were able to get more in depth in some of these issues, including presentational skills, which I think was very helpful. We got kind of sidebarring on a very specific special education issue, and you and I had said, hey, we've dealt with that issue. We might have some ideas about how you might want to deal with that. It had nothing to do with the presentation we were having. It had to do with, we made a professional contact. They were dealing with a similar issue. Hey, listen, we might have an idea, and you might give us some ideas back on that. The idea that that educational conferences are not a trade show, and I don't mean from a vendor trade show, I mean a trade show, is a misnomer. There's a world of ideas out there of people that can do things and can help you with things that if you never meet them, you never know. And I expect the folks that work for me, the people in leadership positions, to be able to network and bring ideas back so we can understand what's going on out there to help us meet our needs.
Well, and that's interesting because if you trace the, I put it in air quotes, traditional path of a school administrator. So if you have somebody who maybe they were a classroom teacher and then went back to school and became a school administrator. Maybe they were a really good teacher, maybe an elementary school teacher, somebody who has no problem. I think about both of my parents who were teachers. So they were teachers. My father went on to become an administrator. My mom didn't. But, my mom would tell me that she would have no problem, spending all day, every day talking in front of 25 or 30 kids. But if you put her in front of a group of adults, couldn't do it. And I think, what are we doing in this profession to help our people coming up through?
Well, I think, Mike, there's a couple of things. One is you're starting to see more non-traditional pathways come through to leadership roles. And when you and I were doing executive level searches together, we were welcoming of those non-traditional pathways because they brought different perspectives. However, there still is probably a traditional path that people get into this. And it's not that people aren't intelligent or they aren't capable of doing it. It has nothing to do with it. They just simply haven't been exposed to dealing with business owners at scale, or the Chamber of Commerce, or fill in the politicians, or fill in the blank. And there's a skill set that many industries train their executive level leadership on that we also can train them on.
But we ignore it. Nobody trains because we think it's not as important as learning about pedagogy or learning about doing teacher observations better.
I think you and I would both submit that if a principal doesn't understand pedagogy or can't do evaluations, they're going to fail.
Agreed.
Likewise, if they can't communicate with their parent base or their community or their faculty, they're also going to fail. We ignore the other half of that equation. And we don't have to, because there are really good opportunities out there to train people on this so they can at least be adequate, so they can be sufficient on it.
So, and I think the conference context, if we think about context-based leadership, the conference context is a great opportunity to practice a lot of these skills, to practice those networking skills, to practice those communication skills.
It's about what we talk about, Mike, is really at the end of the day, and we joke it up and it's funny and all these other things, but it's really about having conversations with people you don't know, engaging them in a way that they are on board rather than off board. And this could be people in your community. It could be your PTA leader who just comes on. This is about the ability to communicate with individuals so they feel welcome and comfortable as opposed to off-put.
Right. And again, that doesn't just happen. You don't wake up one morning and say, I'm all of a sudden better at making people feel included and being clearer with my communication. Those are skills, and they take practice. And you need help with it. You need coaching, you need feedback. I mean, we don't get better at things without instruction and feedback from a knowledgeable coach. That is clear in the research all over the place.
Well, what do we know about adult learning? It's very similar to student learning. If we don't practice the things that we're talking about, then we will never get better at them, right? Someone can sit in front of them and talk all day, but if we don't practice them, if we don't give constructive feedback, this whole idea of leadership mentoring, leadership coaching is a direction that a lot of states are taking to help bolster their educational leadership folks.
Well, they better do something, Dan, because
Right.
we can't even find teachers. And have you had to do a high school principal search recently? Try to find a high school principal. You can't. It's tough. People are not leaving the teaching ranks to go into administration. We don't have people coming out of college who want to be teachers. It is a a looming tsunami.
So we have to ask ourselves why that is. And, I think we know the answers to a lot of that after talking with people. But why is that? And what need is not being met? Because there are wonderful jobs out there. There are wonderful career opportunities. There's wonderful life opportunities out there. But why do people feel like they aren't prepared for this stuff? And so let's start with it. Societal expectations have increased exponentially. There's no question, right? You have things coming at you every second of every day. Are they unmanageable? No. But we don't prepare people to manage them.
Agreed.
So
I guess that begs the question, how do you prepare people to manage it?
well, they have to have. Listen, state education departments are going to stay in their certification realms. Some are moving outside of them a little bit. The fact of the matter is, someone who's certificated, who has the authority, will not necessarily have the personal power to facilitate the job. What do you do? So if you hire someone who has great potential, look for ways to get them help. Look for ways to get them mentoring. Look for ways to get them coaching. Look for that objective person who's good at what they do to help these folks get through the things that really land school leaders on the rocks.
Well, and part of it too, again, you can't be a prophet in your own land. If I'm your supervisor and I'm also trying to mentor you, there's an inherent conflict there.
You can't mentor someone who you're supervising. That doesn't work. Because,
but we expect it all the time.
Of course we do, because there are fiscal constraints and all these other things that we think there can be some of that. But however, the ability to actually sit down with someone and say, here are the things that I'm struggling with, here are the decisions I've made, what do you think I'm struggling with, is not going to happen with it. What is an interesting dynamic that's happened to us, Mike, has been, as we've done the presentation, we've done extension activities for multiple organizations now. And it has been superintendents or executive directors of organizations bringing us in to say, we need you to start the conversation, to move the ball forward so we can have the conversation.
Right. And somebody, and again, like I said before, you can't be a prophet in your own land. You need to have sometimes somebody come in and help facilitate that conversation and say the things that we are able to say in a humorous and lighthearted way that if you said, it might not go so well.
Well, and I think it's about the people want to have these conversations, Mike. They do. It's on their minds. They just don't know if they can bring it up. The whole conversation about at work friends are fine, boyfriends and girlfriends aren't. Listen, that's a really touchy conversation. You need somebody to say that's not going to go well. So they want to talk about that stuff.
Well, and I think we do people a disservice by not talking about it. That's the kind of thing, and you have a great way of saying it, right? It's not a problem until it's a problem.
And then it's a problem.
And then it's a problem.
And then it's usually HR's problem or the superintendent's problem or the principal's problem or at all. So
everybody gets to participate in those dumpster fires.
They all do. So one of the things, though, that is, I think, been the best about what we've done is we've met a lot of great people.
We have.
And they all seem to have similar stories about certain situations. Always.
Yeah, I would argue there are more similarities than differences in the various groups that we've worked with. And we have been all over the place. We've been in Pennsylvania, we've been in Michigan, San Antonio, New Orleans, national conferences,
Savannah.
Regional, there was Savannah. So
we've done a bunch here in New York State.
Yeah.
It struck me that go back to hiring for a second, because hiring well is, I think, a very important piece. And it's the ability for people to surround themselves with folks that have skills that they don't have.
And that one, and I'm glad you brought that up, because that actually, folks, is going to be the topic of our next podcast. How to hire so that you can develop a team that can function effectively. So Dan White, thank you. This was a great conversation.
Wonderful.
Wide ranging, and again, a little shout out to our AESA friends who participated in the workshop, and we hope we get to continue to interact with you. And if you have questions or would like to contact Dan or me, our email addresses will be in the show notes. And we really appreciate you sticking with us throughout this podcast.
We appreciate it.
This episode of the School Leadership Show has been brought to you by, nobody. So if you know someone who would like to sponsor the show and reach over 50,000 school leaders, you need to email me at mike@schoolleadershipshow.com. In any case, thanks for listening to this episode of the School Leadership Show, a podcast for aspiring and practicing school leaders. Send your comments, questions, and show ideas to me, mike@schoolleadershipshow.com. And please consider rating the podcast in iTunes and leaving a comment. And definitely pass the show along to your colleagues.